this discussion, which we are about to start, and the opening of the exhibition at Adolf Loos on Contemporary. This is an incredibly important night for us, not only to celebrate the exhibition, but also to mark the relaunch of the Arthur Ross Architecture Gallery post-renovation and expansion. And I want to start by thanking Mrs. Ross and the Ross Foundation for their incredible support of the gallery and the exhibition's program. I'd also like to say, since we have so many of you here, that next semester we will be having a continued heavy exhibition program with a show on the designer Muriel Cooper, an exhibition on Buckminster Fuller's World Game, and an exhibition on the UNESCO Human Rights exhibition of early post-war. For those of you who know the gallery, you probably are aware that we've grown accustomed to researching, curating, designing, and producing our own exhibitions. And so Yehuda's exhibition on Adolf Loos posed a bit of a riddle for us. We had to figure out how to take his exhibition, which was already well conceived and had various iterations in galleries in Portugal and Vienna, and translate it for the gallery here. But this is one of the brilliant curatorial quirks of Yehuda's project, is that it works as a kind of exquisite corpse exhibition in which all of the main pieces are assembled, and yet his conceit is that the show will take on new characteristics as it migrates. In our sense, I think it's pretty straightforward how we manage this. We, like Yehuda, focused on the videos of his interviews with a series of major architectural figures, in which his conversations illuminate some of the important influences of Loos for these figures and their practices. But we also started to think about the content of the exhibition in a fairly straightforward way, and there are three sets of documents in the exhibition. One is a set of projects by artists and architects which show a strong inheritance and debt to Adolf Loos. So in a sense, these are projects which echo or cite or repeat or copy in some aspect something of Loos. The second set of documents are the originals of Loos, which have always existed in Yehuda's project as scanned documents. In this version of the exhibition, they're more emphatically copies, so copies of originals and original copies organize the entire exhibition. And then there's a third set of documents which were added to the exhibition for its American version. A set of letters between architect Richard Neutra and Rudolf Schindler and Adolf Loos, as well as a set of photographs of some important exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art, and Cooper Union, which was an exhibition that Yehuda organized in the 1980s. I should also point out that there is a sister exhibition by the architect Ines Weissman, Repeat Yourself, Loos Law, and the Culture of the Copy, which will open slightly later this week, for which we will have an event on November 25th. But so the two exhibitions are independent of each other and so have staggered appearances. So for those of you also who know the gallery, you know that this is a university gallery, which means that most of the work that happens in the gallery is because of the incredible devotion of our architectural student crew. And so I want to thank the entire exhibition's crew, and in particular the exhibition's assistant, Katie Zayden and Michelle Mortensen. I need to thank Katja Davidson, who is a CCCP assistant, who worked tirelessly on this exhibition. But I would also really like to highlight the work of Nina Rotnick, who is a recent graduate of the school and who is the assistant curator for this version of the exhibition, for untangling the bureaucratic red tape for loans and licensing and shipping, which was surprisingly substantial for this exhibition. Nathan Carter, who runs a fab lab, worked with our students to produce and fabricate the chairs that are in the exhibition. Adam Bandler, who is the exhibition's coordinator, worked also with an incredible degree of dedication to this project. Paul Dallas and Gavin Browning of the events office helped organize this and the entire and all of the events around the exhibition. Yehuda is probably going to thank the speakers tonight in more detail, as well as everyone who was involved in previous versions of this exhibition. But I also want to underscore the support of the Austrian Cultural Forum for this version of the exhibition and also its previous exhibitions. And of course, I want to thank Dean Mark Wigley for his support for the gallery and the exhibitions program. And obviously, I want to thank Yehuda for his relentless fascination with Loos and for reminding us of Loos's importance, his strangeness, and his continued relevance. Thank you very much.
Good evening, thank you for coming here. You probably mentioned that by now I'm sufficiently tired to be silent, especially when I've learned several languages, and so the temptation to be silent is even greater with each one of them, each one alone and each one together. I would like to thank first of all to our Metseni, GSAPP, and Jeffrey Brown, who actually have great faith in us and love of Loos that really put this project on the road. And then I want to thank to a person who is absent here, whose idea it was in the first place, which is Christoph Hohenstein, at the present time is the director of the MAC, the Museum of Angewandte Kunst of Applied Art in Vienna, who one day in Vienna said to me, could we have a conversation? I said, yes, of course. I will be in New York in a few weeks' time. I said, just give me a call. He gave me a call and we met no less than in the Cigar Bar in the nice square there, which is one of my favorite spots in New York. And he said to me, I was aware of your Loos exhibition from '85. I thought it would be very appropriate to have another Loos exhibition to celebrate the 100 years of the Looshaus and Ornament and Crime. What do you think? So I looked at him and I smiled and I said, well, you know, in the meantime I acquired other priorities and other tastes. And I'm not sure I want to travel back on this road. And he looked at me and smiled as well and said, doch, meaning in German, you know, trotzdem, you know, in spite of. So I said, let me think about it. And that is the way we parted on that day. And indeed, I went to think about it. And then I was thinking of a book that made an indelible impression on me in the early years of my life. When I was in high school, I think. I never missed any play in theater. And one of the great events of my youth was Jan Kot. I don't know how many of you know the name. Jan Kot was a great man of, Polish great man of theater. And he wrote at the time, I saw his production of Hamlet, which was formidable. You know, nearly 50 years later, I still remember it. And he wrote a book, Shakespeare Art Contemporary. And that lit a green light. Then I knew Adolf Loos Art Contemporary. No, not who was Adolf Loos. This I've done already in the 80s, and there is a fine catalog of that. You can look it up, you can read other books, you can read Shachal, Rukshon Shachal, the great Bible of Loos, which is not in the exhibition, but it's too heavy, too large. But what does Loos means now, and what did he mean over the years? That was the idea. That was the idea of the exhibition. That is the idea of the exhibition. And every time there are new kind of colors. I mean, I started with, for example, Kelly installation, Heidi, which you can see in the exhibition. Unfortunately, not the installation, but a video of it. But even recently as several months ago, we had Jonathan Franzen, one of the best known and popular writer, coming out with a book called Karl Kraus Project. And what is the Karl Kraus Project? It's the idea that Karl Kraus' writings have such insight that this insight could provide us some kind of help in these days in which similar problems exist in society. Problems like the uncommensurable influence of the media, problems like how, you see, culture is very fragile, and it's very fragile not in any particular time. It's always very fragile. And therefore, the debate of how to understand language, how to use it appropriately, there are issues that we have to confront every time again. And in this way, because after all, I believe that if architecture is anything, it's a conversation. It's a conversation how to dress up, how to undress, how to dress for special occasion, etc., etc. So this conversation is really, the life of architecture is this conversation. And the more closely I look at this, I was going to end up like Karl Kraus. The closer I look at the world, the further away it would back at me. But in this back and forth between me and the architects that have interrogated on the subject, you have to excuse for the word interrogation, a mild form, as you can see in the video. But I was amazed. First of all, I was amazed at the generosity and the richness of the subject for so many architects. Some of them you wouldn't associate with the issue, like Toyo Ito. And the moment I wrote to Toyo Ito, he immediately invited me to come to talk to him about it. That was not complete surprise. By then I was ready. Going to talk to Siza in Porto. Siza spoke for 1 hour, 13 minutes without interruption. All I had to say, yes. Could you continue, please? So I think what we have garnered in this cycle is of extreme interest, not just for the topic of laws, but the topic of architecture today and the conversation we are having, because that increased the gamut, increased the range of what is being discussed. Personally, I admit that copy and originality is a terribly important topic, but it is not a topic, it's not the subject of this exhibition, notwithstanding all other things. So interpretation is always a difficult subject. I once was in Germany when Jan Robert Jauss gave a keynote lecture on was ist hermeneutics, what is hermeneutics? And he said, hermeneutics is the theory of interpretation in the absence of authority. So it's not easy to appreciate for the public how difficult and how controversial it is. That evening, I realized that this man, in the folly of his youth, became a very ardent Nazi. And because I thought this sentence so extraordinary that I detected in his voice his former life. Then it was confirmed. But that evening I was already able to say as much as that. And I tell you this anecdote only to tell you that this voyage of mine, creating this exhibition, which began very early on, long before I had any idea of this exhibition, is full of such moments. For example, the moment I went to see another Heidi. The Heidi was the daughter of Schlick, the founder of the Vienna Circle that was formed by Schlick after his enthusiasm for Wittgenstein's Tractatus. So I went to see Heidi on the recommendation of Schechter, who was the favorite students of Schlick and a friend of Paul Engelmann, who was the students of both Loos and Karl Kraus. However, I came to Heidi's house in Holland because she and her mother flee from Vienna after their father was murdered by some of these arranged students who suspected that Schlick had an affair with his girlfriend. May or may not be true. So I had a incredible conversation with Heidi. She told me about this afternoon when she and her father went to see Wittgenstein and how he didn't say much except offer them tea and read the short stories of Tolstoy, which meant a lot to me because I read the short story of Tolstoy when I was in high school. And then before I left, she looked at me and said, "Are you interested in seeing the copy of the Tractatus that my father received from Wittgenstein with dedication?" I said, "Yes, I'll be happy." So she climbed the ladder and she goes to the top shelf and she pulled down this book and she gave it to me with a smile on her face. She gave it to me in my hand. I opened it and I read, "Please, my friend, read the book, but as soon as you've done so, please forget it." So with these words, I end my presentation.
My name is Hermann Czech. I'm the first of three speakers. I think they only don't come to the table at first because two of us have to show images, and those images should be also seen by the panel. The whole event, the exhibition, is about the fact that the thought of Adolf Loos is still valid today, and expectedly also in some future, still valid to be considered on the one hand, but on the other hand, this thought is in time, in a distance of 100 years. So something has changed, and in my short presentation now, I would like to consider things that I have a problem with because they have changed. One thing that should not have changed, but is widely considered to have changed, is the fact that the limit of the number of people who can understand a speaker speaking without microphone is 4,000. This is why Loos made a sketch design for a theater of 4,000, of which the model was a building that still is existing, the auditorium building in Chicago by Sullivan and Adler, or Adler and Sullivan, whatever. And there were not only theater performances and operas, but also political events, so not trained speakers could be understood by an audience of 4,000. Nobody would believe this nowadays. Now I will talk about when we can we skip to turn out the light? Even thank you. I will consider two topics that actually have changed. One is shown in the first picture. Pictures you see here are shown in the exhibition. That is considering the dressing, the definition of personality by clothes. You probably, most of you know that Loos said to the topic of being well dressed, what is being well dressed? What does it mean? It means being dressed correctly, and that means that correct clothing is with the aim to attract the least attention. And I just quote roughly what his argument is in this respect is. This principle of not attracting attention is not practicable in all places. A coat which remains unnoticed in Hyde Park may very well strike in Peking, Beijing, we have to say, Zanzibar, or on St. Stephen's Square in Vienna. Therefore, this rule has to be restricted. To be dressed correctly, one must not arouse attention in the center of culture. The center of Occidental culture presently is London in 1900. That's what he meant. But still, he would have to modify this because it's not in all. He might be dressed correctly in Hyde Park. But when he comes suddenly to Whitechapel, he still already might arouse attention. So it has also, again, to be restricted. To be dressed correctly means in the center of culture, at a certain occasion, and in the best society. And he in the 1970s, and exactly in 1970, at the 100th birthday of Loos, there is one of several publications where I edited one of the last numbers of Bau, the magazine edited by Hans Hollein and Walter Pichler and several others. A number on Adolf Loos, and we introduced pictures of an artist, Heinz Frank, pictures that are also in the exhibition, pictures of clothing of Heinz Frank, where various rules by Loos are presented in a text with these pictures, and where there are obviously contradictions already, not 100 years later, but already 1970. For example, it's about trousers, long trousers, short trousers, or he says the future, Loos says, the future are bare knees. Why? Because children have bare knees nowadays. Young people have bare knees, and this will be the future. Or what about the vest? How can I hope this works? Yeah, the vest. Yeah. To the left, all kinds of ordeal. How is it possible to? Is it possible to wear a patterned shirt to a black tie, jacket, to go in a theater? Now, Heinz Frank proves that it is possible. So that is one thing that obviously has changed, in the sense that even this caricature, which is meeting this point by Loos, that different professions, different cultural circles are represented by clothes. So many decades ago, before 1900, the musician, the actor, the poet, and the painter would look different, while in 1900, in the top of culture, they don't differentiate in clothing, and they rather use the clothing as a mask. Their personality, they differentiate by personality and not by looking. Now, I think that there has been a change, that people don't, all in this argument and this idea establishes a certain status of society, and what if you want to protest or just differentiate against or from this society, you very well can do it also with your exterior appearance. This is one topic, and the second topic I would like to introduce is Loos's approach to the historical background of architecture. And with this model, which is with the model of this house, it's not a historical stylistic imitation of a historical house, but it's an antique. It's using the antique vocabulary, but with an analytical, productive approach in the use of these elements. Just to give some hints for the procedure of this design. Just for example, look at the axis of this front, the axis of the additive upper part, and of the lower part, which is integral, do not correspond. But if you look at the second time, the two outer, the middle axis does correspond, but also the two outer axes correspond, so that there is a complex relation of modularity. But the architrave that is on top, resting on the top of the columns, is much too slender for a classical architrave. It rather seems to be a beam, an iron beam restrained at the ends and quasi cantilevering from these sides. Above this beam there are dados, plinths, that in classical canon would have to be below the columns. The columns themselves appear a relaxed part of the system, and the truth is they don't support any loads. The stairs connecting with a sloping square in front are not set in front of the columns as it would be in a classical temple. Instead, they are between them to link the portico more intensely to the square. The lowermost steps intersect with the slope. So this is a productive, analytical treatment of this material of the vocabulary of classic antiquity. In a book, recently appeared, there are two books on the Looshaus appeared recently, one by Marco Pogacnik in German and one by Christopher Long in English. And there are two images out of Pogacnik's book. This drawing already appeared in parts in Ruccio and Jacques' book. This is the whole sketch, and here is if you see here or in here, there is a certain irregularity of, the columns are in a first approach not regular, not standing one above the other, but they are distributed unequally above the two floors of ground floor and mezzanine. And in another element, this is a postcard several years before the Looshaus, sent to Adolf Loos by, I don't know his first name, by Bear. What was it? Johann Bear? I don't know. Where he points out to Loos a church front of the late 18th century in Florida, where as well there are irregular positions of columns along a facade, and the text says this facade teaches us that styles can be combined in a very simple way, or more formulated in a better formulation, that there is no style. Loos is of the opinion, when he, although he is using this in a productive analytical manner, he is of the opinion, I quote, "Our culture is founded on the recognition of the unsurpassed greatness of classical antiquity. Each time architecture deviates again and again from its great ancestral models through the petty, the ornamentalists, there is a great architect at hand to guide it back to the principles of classical antiquity. Fischer von Erlach in the south and Schlüter in the north are the rightful masters of the 18th century, and on the threshold of the 19th century stands Schinkel. We have forgotten him." At that time, 1970, when this was written, or in the 70s, no, exactly 1970, I took the conclusion that we should at least do without other models, other even older examples of architecture as quotations. Now, the thing obviously is that the validity of classical antiquity can be doubted very much, and a design like this is still very much respected. But for example, there is only a few, maybe a year ago or so, in the magazine San Rocco, is a very substantial article by Guido Tesio on this design. But there are drawings made up for this article, as in the style of the Holl magazine, containing also other articles, where an important element of the classical vocabulary is missing, and obviously not known anymore. It is the so-called entasis. It is the outline of the shaft of a column, which is slightly curved. The slight curvature of this shaft is forgotten. They just make two straight lines, and it's just a conical shaft without this element. On the other hand, Guido Tesio makes up the parts of this design, one consisting of a design that Loos did a few years earlier, a sepulchral monument for cemetery for the art historian Max Dvorak, where this element, if you look at this design, forms the plinth, the pedestal of this column. Now, you remember that Loos argued first that it was the entry of a competition. The idea was to design the most beautiful skyscraper ever, and Loos argued with the argument, which is still true, even if it's not, when it's not built. It's a piece that you remember whenever you have seen it, in reality or in an image, and at the same time you should, if it was built, you would have connected it to the idea and to the city of Chicago. Let aside the pun that the column is also a newspaper column in a newspaper printing. Now, what has been built in the place of this design, you know, is this building, which not works with a cultural idea, but with a style. And what also has happened is that there is a shift in scale, of this building. Here we have it. We have to look at it. It's that size. I mean, it was not understood at the time of Loos. Very many critics either thought it was a mistake by Loos, not coincident with his arguments, or he had the idea to make fun. While only much later in the 70s or so, you could compare it to for example, works by, say, Jazz Orgenbuch. But now, as the understanding for antiquity, which a student still had to learn in the 60s or 70s, and which he has not to learn today, and also people don't understand it anymore. What relevance does this still have? I'm finished.
Anyway, thank you very much, Yehuda, for inviting us to revisit Loos. When Yehuda asked me to participate in this project, I have the same reaction he had when he was invited to think about Loos 100 years later. Let me think about it. Because in fact, I hadn't been thinking about Loos for a long time. All the work that I have done, around here, ruminated around here, and written around here. So it has been a very nice occasion for me to go back. And Hermann thinks that things have changed. I also think things have changed, but what I'm interested in how has changed the way in which we look at things. Right? So how ourselves going back to the same subject after 20 years, suddenly we see entirely different things. So Adolf Loos is, of course, the only architect of his generation whose thinking is still influential today. And in this, paradoxically, he might have fulfilled his own prophecy that his work will last longer than that of his contemporaries because it will be passed by word of mouth rather than photographed in architectural journals. The essence of what he said over 3 decades of polemical arguments in newspapers, journals, public lectures, and manifestos. And when I say polemical, maybe you can see there intercourse or masturbation in the advertisement of the Atelier, or let me see, Ornament and Crime. Well, the essence of what he said was that art did not have anything to do with the everyday object. The practice of artists and architects of his time to design everyday objects was, in Loos' opinion, illegitimate. These objects were already being designed by craftsmen who perfected them over time in anonymous, continuous, collective process of design. In that sense, the object type of Le Corbusier, or the object trouvé of the surrealist, Duchamp's ready-made, or the Asphalt of Allison and Peter Smithson, and so on, anticipated in those applications of the generic plumbing fixture. Precisely, they are all obsessed with plumbing fixtures. This is one of the fascinating things, also a connection between Duchamp and Loos. You know, the most beautiful works of art that America has created are its installations and its plumbing. So the American bathtub, the tonnette chair, and it's kind of beautiful to see these photographs of this tender photograph of Adolf Loos at age 4, already holding this tonnette chair that will become like such a symbol in his life. Oh, of course, the English raincoat. When after an absence of 3 years in America, I appeared in Vienna in the year 1896 and saw my colleagues again, I have to rub my eyes. All the architects were dressed like artists, not like other people, but from an American point of view, like buffoons. People laughed, but the government, which was advised by journalists, made all of them doctors and professors. I was in favor of the old Viennese carpentry, tradition, and quality. Their work was like their clothing. I was left out of their circle. I was not an artist, as was demonstrated by my clothing. So I think that Loos may have had in mind actually Gustav Klimt, who went around dressing this in his long artist smoke even when he wasn't painting. In the group photograph of the secession members taking their building in 1902, Klimt is the only one that is still wearing a robe. He was, of course, the undisputed leader of the secession, and yet for all of Loos' continuous and virulent attacks on that institution and what it represented, the figure of Klimt remains surprisingly untouched. Loos never criticized Klimt by name, as he did with Joseph Maria Olbrich, the architect of the station building, with Hoffman, which is the kind of the center of his most virulent attacks, or with Colomon and Moser. On the contrary, during the controversy on Klimt's university paintings, here you have 2 of them, jurisprudence and philosophy, Loos precisely came to his defense. He said, with the Klimt affair, we saw a band of professors allied themselves with the haranguers from the Naxmark, whose motto was down with individuality. What is shocking about this statement is precisely that Loos, which is the great defender of anonymous form, sided with the unique individual. Why then this unexpected solidarity with Klimt? Why was the leader of the secession exempt from Loos' usual devastating critique? Why will Klimt's extraordinary rich and intricate layer of color, pattern, eroticism, and symbolism not offend the formulation that ornament is a crime because it's not of our time? The architect, so proud of his muted, golden, and salad suit and the austere exterior of his buildings, stands unusually silent before the flamboyant, loud, overly sexualized, technicolor artist in a smock. Loos' critique of the secession is bound, of course, with a critique of the new Viennese bourgeoisie, the poor rich man of Loos' famous story, who had commissioned a house from a secessionist and was afraid to go from room to room because the clothes designed for one room were not appropriate for the next. Everything, down to the slippers, was designed by the architect and could only be used in the designated room. As Karl Kraus put it, they have the dirt of the streets in their homes and even that is by Hoffman. What is less known, and definitely have not been part of the discourse about Loos, not even my own discourse about Loos, but in fact, as I was saying before, our eyes have changed, our sensibility have changed. Right? The clients and supporters of the secession and the Vienna Restate were primarily young, progressive, and Jewish. And the critique of the secession is bound up in racial stereotypes, as you will see immediately, if not plain anti-Semitism. Klaus Kraus, born to a prominent Jewish family, had renounced Judaism in 1899, the same year in which he started the magazine Die Fackel. And he reported in the magazine that the great success of the Viennese secession in the 1900 Wall exhibition was due to the fact that the Parisians have called the style and good Jewish, and Jewish taste. In a number of texts that were, I would say, surprisingly excluded, or perhaps were edited out of Loos' volumes of writings, he explicitly associates the secession with Jewish bourgeoisie, even argued that the new ornate gilded interiors of the secession constitute what he says, his words, a new ghetto. In a manuscript entitled The Emancipation of Judaism, Loos writes that the interior of Hoffman and Olbrich betray the oldness as much as their new names do. And then he says, surely there must be Moritz and Siegfried who are Aryans, just as they are Aryans, owners of interiors by Hoffman. They are exceptions. Having abandoned their kaftan some time ago, Loos argues they end up wearing a new one. The secessionist interiors are not more than masked kaftans, that's what he says. Loos, like Kraus, was in favor of the assimilation of Jews and saw it precisely as a symptom of modernity. He says, he writes, every sympathizer of the emancipation of Judaism, every person hostile to the ghetto, therefore every person favorable to our culture must suffer seeing how the Jews create a new ghetto for themselves. Most of, but the whole thing is complicated, of course, because most of Loos' clients, his collaborators, his students, his friends, and even two of his wives were Jewish. They were Jewish, the clients were Jewish intellectuals. In place of the pseudo-modern kaftan of the secession interior, Loos offered with his architecture an alternative form of clothing, an English raincoat. Loos' critique of the secession and the Vienna Restate was also gender-loaded. This didn't escape me in 1980-something. But his association, of course, with the ornament and femininity, with Jewish ambition, remains unexplored, perhaps because of the reverence that Loos still inspires in architects today. But it's important to understand that it clearly is organizing this polemic, so we have an obligation now to look at it differently. The figure of modernity for Loos, as for more writers of modernity, was emphatically made. Women, children were primitive, ignoble savages, as distinct from the heroic figure of the modern man as primitive, noble savage. For Loos, the lack of ornament is a sign of an intellectual power. I read a quote from him, it's almost unbelievable, but let me read it. The first ornament that came into being, the cross, had an erotic origin. The first work of art was in order to rid himself of his natural excesses. A horizontal line, the reclining woman. A vertical line, the man who penetrates her. The man who created it felt the same urge as Beethoven, but the man of our time, who dubs the walls with erotic symbols to satisfy an inner urge, is a criminal or a degenerate. And of course, when this degeneration of the masculine into the feminine becomes associated with homosexuality, another thing that I miss in the 80s, another thing that all of us miss in the 80s and 90s, Loos' rage against ornament is not only gender-loader, but is openly homophobic. The main target of Loos' attacks become the effeminate architect, the secessionist and Vienna Restate figure of the decorator, of course Joseph Olbrich, Polo Moser, Joseph Hoffman, etc. All, he says, he writes, these dilettanti, fops, and suburban dandies who buy their pre-tied ties in the women's fashion. All art is erotic, he wrote in Ornament and Crime. And in the end, it's precisely this line between art and architecture that Loos wants to draw. And as long as Klimt remains on the side of art, he can be exempt from his criticism, no matter what he wears. But Loos, I think, may also have been identified, a sense of identification with Klimt. They were both the target of virulent and moralizing critique. Klimt was portrayed by the Viennese press as a pornographer, flaunting public lewdness, particularly with regard to the paintings of the university that I showed you before. This one is the third one, Medicine, where symptomatically Loos came to his side. Loos' work was also the subject of a prolonged and heated controversy during the construction, particularly of the Goldman and Sachs building in the Michaeler Place that you just saw. It was precisely in this context that Loos had conveniently invoked the memory of Klimt University paintings scandal, comparing it to the one that was exploding around his work in the Michaeler Place. Loos' persona was also questioned. In the 1920s, there were already a number of articles in the Viennese press attacking his moral character. Both Klimt and Loos had complicated, let's say, private life that became public scandals. Klimt, who lived with his mother and two sisters all his life and had a long platonic relationship with his sister-in-law, Emily Flood. Emily Flood was a very accomplished designer of reform dresses. Here she is wearing a gown by Klimt, and here is some of her reform dresses. In any case, at the time of his death, Klimt was facing 14 paternity suits from the women he had used as model, including the fellow inside that Toyo Ito, who died soon after birth, and he changed the painting thereafter. Loos spent 4 months in prison, accused of pederastia. All of a sudden, all these cute little children in front of the house that I always thought was another kind of connotation. Having had a succession of child wife and other affairs with women who never seemed young enough. You probably think that this is a photograph of one of his wives when she was a child, but it's not. It's Elsie Allman. Let me see. She married Lina Loos in 1902 when she was 18, 12 years younger than him. According to her, he was envious of her success as an actress and tried to discourage her from following her career. She divorced him after 2 years. He met then his second, this is of course the famous bedroom for Lina Loos. This is Elsie. Elsie, of course, anyway, by the time Lina divorced him, she was already 22 old for him. She married his other one, Elsie Allman, who was 17 and 30 years younger than him. Here are some photographs of Elsie. Again, you probably think I'm showing images of Elsie as a child. But no, this is Elsie in 1918, and this is Adolf Loos in 1918 after some sort of problem. He's in the hospital. And here is 1921, both of them in perhaps happier times. Claire Beck, a photographer, was 35 years younger than him. That's his wife. He shared this interest with women that were very, very young, with his friend Peter Altenberg, also incidentally suspected of child molestation, who used the term Kindmädchen, child girl, to describe the women they were attracted to. As Loos' ex-wife Elsie Allman put it in her memoirs, I have always been a woman child, and this is what Loos loved in me. But all of a sudden he finds that I don't have sex appeal, and moreover, that my legs are too short. If I have longer legs, he said, it will change my life. So Loos decided to take me to a surgeon who will break my 2 legs and elongate them. So he, of course, lived him. I mean, I should say perhaps he broke with him rather than breaking her legs. And later I will write this memoir. The memoir where she tells all this story, and you can see she is no longer a child. She has transformed herself. Loos' public moralism, denouncing ornament as a savage perversion, is perhaps a pathological symptom of body attacks, a disguise a displacement. Loos could never object to print over sexual intensity, rather he effectively credits instead Hoffman's black and white patterns with sexual degenerative, tell me about it, by making Hoffman his emblem of secessionist crime. In the end, Loos' silence about Klim, like the silence he advocated for modern identity, remains a mask, perhaps disguising feelings stronger than those he felt towards Hoffman. There is no reason to think that Loos had any strong negative feelings about the person he continually attacked. Like a school bully, he simply sensed weakness and used it strategically to promote his arguments. The consequence of Krauss and Loos' position was precisely that public statements don't reveal personal feelings. On the contrary, they hide them. Hoffman was just a convenient prop to make an argument that remains surprisingly influential today. Thank you.
But now we are coming to Pedro, who is the MoMA curator for contemporary architecture, who has chosen to respond to what we have said so far.
Actually, the way Beatriz made Loos our contemporary just kind of changed my mind about everything I wanted to say. Well, let's say that indeed, does Loos become more contemporary as soon as we analyze some features of his psychological way of being, or does he in fact become something of the past as our societies become more puritanical and therefore reject more and more any possibility of divergence from a certain norm? So I think it's really interesting to look at Loos precisely as one that tried to understand norm and continue norm, but of course at the same time being fascinated with the transgression of norm. And I say these not because of his sexual preferences, but because when he came to America, he was fascinated by the informality of the United States, which I thought, particularly today, very interesting. Of course, he was coming from Vienna, where all this formality was in place in terms of dress codes, in terms of the way architecture was responding to a moment of change, a dramatic moment of change in terms of the metropolitan character of cities. And when he comes to America, he's fascinated by the possibilities of this still informal society. And I would say that again, if we look 100 years back, as I was writing in some text a week ago, maybe actually Loos would be shocked with the reversion and the fact that the US is now the most formalized, completely regulated, and therefore completed a sort of inversion in regards to what you see now in other societies, including the European one, maybe driven by economical crisis, driven to these new processes of informality. So this opposition between formality and informality, I think actually are very interesting in terms of the expression of the permanent importance of Loos when he's actually trying to make sense of society. And this is something I actually received from Beatriz, and that was very important to me when I was doing my PhD on architecture and mass media, which was the fact that maybe Loos was one of the first to understand, even before Corbusier, I would say, one of the first to understand the importance of mass media and the importance of having his voice transmitted over journals that were not dedicated to a specific audience, a specific architectural audience, but to the general society. And I think it's interesting that we still today reflect probably more on the writings of Loos than in his architecture, in his built architecture. I mean, of course, architects have been influenced and are still influenced by the work of Loos and are still using some of the lessons of Loos in terms of architecture, but I think mostly we are reading his writings and we are reconsidering his writings in the light of constant changes in our contemporary times. And this is where I think it's really interesting, again, the contradictions of the personality of Loos. Because, of course, when you, as a student, probably at a given moment, were reading Ornament and Crime, you would say that this man was defending a type of architecture which was profoundly contradictory to the buildings that you could actually go and visit in Vienna. I mean, I had this personal experience, at least. I was reading Loos as the defendant of this pureness in architecture that drove the whole modernist ideology, but when I went to Vienna, what I saw were these lush and highly decorative interior spaces that were totally in disaccord with the writings that then led onto the ideological formation of modernism. So again, the contradiction is probably what makes Loos more interesting from a contemporary point of view. This being said, it is true, and because I'm here as a Portuguese architect as well, one that studied in Porto, one that studied under Siza and Souto de Moura, and one that therefore relates to the first instance of this exhibition in Portugal, of course the influence of Loos came through architectural knowledge, the passing of architectural knowledge. But again, what I remember more is not perhaps the fact that the buildings of Siza are producing sometimes a sort of very clever, as usual in Siza, a very clever caricature of certain elements of Loos and combining them in a very postmodern fashion with other references of his architectural culture. But I was actually remembering more, and perhaps it stayed more in my memory, the fact that Siza's master, Fernando Tavra, was actually dedicating whole classes, 2-hour lectures, to talking about the stits in men's clothes, driving on the readings of Loos about dress codes, and therefore reinterpreting this idea of how classicism actually should be kept through modernism, maybe as a ghost, as we were talking about these chairs that we're sitting on, or maybe actually as something that would still give sense to modernism. So, for me, these lessons, these reflections on writings were actually much more formative in terms of thinking about modernism, in terms of thinking about architecture and what it meant and how it used elements from history and combined them with current tendencies. And I think that's what's left for me of Loos, which I think will always be relevant beyond the taste that he may have in buildings. That is, these contradictions, these possibilities of change of minds, this ability to appreciate both the norm and the transgression of the norm, and of course the idea that writing will stay even when stones are no longer there.
After that, or
I totally disagree. Seeing or constructing contradictions between what Loos said and built, even within what he said and within what he built, is due to a simplification of. Loos is not creating a system. For example, the question of ornament. It's not a fight. It's not a fight for the plane surface. Not at all. I mean, he said he was against ornament. He himself in the late 20s said that there was an exhibition called Fall Without Ornament in Germany organized by the Werkbund, or considering the Bauhaus or whatever. He said those people have stolen my ideas and at the same time disfigured them. And when he was against ornament, he very easily you can point to examples where he used ornament, historical ornament. For example, friezes literally applied as he obviously had seen it with Sullivan, or
in the Knieseshop.
pardon?
The Knieseshop, for example.
Yeah, for example, yeah, and in other occasions. And now in the Grüner shop, in the former Ebenstein. But he said when you use historical ornaments, you have to copy them exactly. Only it's not worthy of modern men to make an effort to invent new ornaments. But not even that is true, because he invented an ornament. He used profiles, industrial profiles, wooden decorative profiles. There were bands of kind of circular little, how would you call it, ropes or some. It was a product that was intended to be glued or nailed or whatever to furniture or to doors or closets or whatever to make them look secessionist. And he used this profile and cut it into pieces, elongated or square or whatever, and used it like this in horizontal and vertical. And from a distance, if you didn't see, if it didn't look exactly, it looked like a meander frieze. He used it up to the Looshaus, up to the First World War, as long as this product was available. So it's just much more complex, this approach. What he said, what you can leave away and what is even a sin or comparable to an ethical mistake, was using a form that was not an idea, was not derived from a thought, and be it a plane surface. He did not fight for the plane surface, he fought against forms that were not ideas. Yeah, I think it's much more complicated.
Of course. But I think you're right in terms of the superficial appropriation of Loos. I think you're right. I think it has been superficially appropriated to justify an ideological position that defends the flat surface and so on.
Yeah.
Even by people who wouldn't read through the essay and therefore would try to find other aspects.
He said that, apropos the Bauhaus, he said that they have made the lack of ornament into a new kind of ornament. I mean, largely behind it, as Hermann already said, is the unestimable unestimable onslaught of mechanical reproduction in the 19th century shifted the entire situation. And this is what Ruskin and William Morris, the entire pre-Raphaelite, tried to overcome in a miserable fashion. I mean, aesthetically, philosophically, theoretically formidable, but in reality, nothing. In reality, neither William Morris nor Ruskin have changed the course of things. They couldn't. How could they? But they've raised the issue. They've raised the issue because such a phenomenon as kitsch, which is the result of mechanical reproduction of ornament, is very well known. And this form of kitsch has spread into so many aspects of life, including the moral. Because Beatriz mentioned the Jewish problem of secularization and style in Vienna. But after all, ballet stock lay, which is the most extravagant manifestation of the secessionist taste and thought, which is really extravagant, extraordinary, beautiful, you could say, in some sense, not after you have learned who is the owner. Who was Stockley? He was a Belge who was one of the greatest exploiters of the Congo. And the place had a secessionist ornament with the animals' heads on the wall, and you know, Stockley didn't only build a palace in Brussels, they also financed much of the secessionists in Vienna. So the situation is highly complex, and we should not forget, talking in America, that Loos was in America, and among other things, not only the plumbing and so on, he was in love with one man. It's obvious. The man wrote more on ornament than anybody else. Not only he was so impressed by Sullivan's work, he was impressed by Sullivan's writing, and he even was corresponding with him. He was very much hoping that the kindergarten conversation that Sullivan published would be translated to German and published in German. So Loos is, on one hand, of course, you can dismiss him with all sorts of personal details, which are all very interesting, of course. But on the other hand, I mean, his culture was in clear opposition to what the other people in Vienna were pushing. I mean, his references were not just the English dancer or the English taste for this person. It was also Oscar Wilde. The famous remark that you have quoted once, you remember, from Corbu, saying that somebody said that a man doesn't look a gentleman doesn't look through the window. In fact, it is Oscar Wilde, because it was Oscar Wilde who was in a hotel in Paris who a young man came to visit him, and that young man didn't pay attention to him because through the window there was a beautiful sight of the Seine. So after a while, Oscar Wilde said to him, a young man doesn't, a young gentleman doesn't look through the window. And of course, Loos used it when a client complained about the window. I mean,
Okay.
it's an Elman's book on James Joyce, by the way.
Yeah.
So I had the list of Loos books, and of course, the fact that you have books doesn't mean that you read them, of course. But in Loos' case, it's clear that many of these books, and above all, of course, Ruskin as well. But it seemed to me that if we look for some kind of way that would enable him to think the way he did, so we have Oscar Wilde and Sullivan.
But I think, I don't think anybody in this audience will have in any way understood that I have dismissed Loos or I'm dismissing Loos with my writing. On the contrary, if I was dismissing Loos, I will not be thinking about Loos, I will not be writing about Loos, I will not be speaking about Loos. I'm not dismissing him. When you talk about the Stockley palace, is precisely what I'm interested in. We didn't used to think about who is the client, where is the money coming from, what are the we used to think about architecture in terms of objects and about the writing. So we didn't think about So this is it raises a lot of questions that have been that have come up not just in architecture but in other fields. I remember 1981. the New York Institute for the Humanities. Susan Sontag saying something about some biography of Proust that had just come up, that he would prefer not to have known some details of his personal life. I think we are in a very different situation now. We prefer to know those details, and those details make a more complex figure of these architects and these cultural situations. This is what we are looking. We prefer to know. We have become incredibly interested in the intimate details of the lives of not only our own lives and sport, but we are also having so many other secrets are bound to come up, and those complicate our readings. And I think that is good. In the 70s, there was no at all any kind of gender critique of laws. I mean, if you look at Atelier, at all the criticism that was coming out of the school of Venice, God forbid, from these guys. No, they have been completely blind to it. What I'm saying is, we were also blind. We may have not been blind to the gender issues in the 80s, but we were blind to other issues, and so other generations will also find that we are blind to other things. In which way this somehow, rather than make us dismiss the architects, makes it a much more, I mean, I like it better, more complicated. Like with Le Corbusier, you know?
Sure.
When I brought up the story of Le Corbusier with Alingre, and I don't know, people say, you have put a bomb under Le Corbusier. I saw smoke coming out of the other side. Well, you saw that, but I didn't, you know, because I thought, you know, now I know more. I mean, I know it's more human. That's exactly right. That's more human. And this is also more human.
And there's another dimension.
And more complicated. And I'm more interested in complications than in simple stories.
Well, I mean, in a way, the title of the second collection of essays of Loos is Trotzdem, which means malgré tout, in spite of.
Exactly.
And so some of us, of course, have learned to appreciate Loos in spite of his shortcomings and his liabilities. His contribution is still fascinating, and the fact is that Hoffman we still admire, but we don't discuss so much.
No.
And Loos that some of us not admire, even those who don't admire him so much are bound to discuss it very much. So this is Loos, and this is why we're coming back to Loos, because we raise issues that haven't been solved, issues that are still with us, and still matters a lot. I mean, I don't think that it's a mere chance, the Stockley being what they are. I don't think it's mere chance that A.H., without pronouncing his full name, was admirer of the Ringstrasse, exactly what Loos criticized. And I think that we would not be busy with architecture if we didn't think that there was an intimate connection between what the city is like and what society and culture is like. Otherwise, this is the ground on which we stand. I mean, of course, you know, the great German writer who just died a few years ago wrote this book, which has the title of a railway station in Paris. It's the name of a man, of a young man, Austerlitz. It's the name of a young man who was born in Czech and arrived in London, studying the Courtauld and trying to understand what is the correlation between a given society and a given city. Of course there is a correlation, we all know that, but nobody can spell it out, of course. And I think we are there. So I propose that we open the floor for discussion, questions. Yes, Mr. Shaw.
I have two questions, hopefully very brief and pointed. I agree with what Hermann Czech said, that Loos doesn't have a system, but there is a consistency. And as regards the consistency of his theory of ornament, it seems to me it partly has to do, it pivots with country. In the country, the ornament is okay, and in the city, basically, however you interpret ornament, it's not. And it's true that this cannot be systematized, but for instance, Mike Kelly and Paul McCarthy took that as a structuring device for their fantasy about hiding in the countryside. And that is something I think that could be discussed, the idea of consistency without a system. And the question I wanted to ask Beatriz is, you speak of the personal complexities of Loos in terms of the gender critique, is it perhaps also a psychoanalytic critique?
Indeed. I mean, how can you not separate it from the context in which all of this is happening? Can you not separate it from this Vienna? I mean, for example, I kind of took it out in the last minute, a lecture he gives, the man with the modern nerves, right?
Oh yeah, the man with modern nerves.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
nervousness.
But
Everybody thought at that time that the nerves are undergoing mutation because of the mechanical environment. Yeah.
Right. So I think it's because you cannot separate. I mean, and many other aspects. I mean, he talks about nervousness and all kinds of psychological disorders in his writings. And again, this is something that nobody has done any serious study at all. And it's impossible to imagine that this is happening regardless of the context.
Yeah.
Right? But with this question of the contradiction, I'm not so sure about that.
you think it's not so consistent?
No, it is not. It's more complicated than that. For example, when he comes to America, the first thing he does when he comes back and writes the first issue of the Sunday is that beautiful first essay in the #1 issue. My uncle is a watchmaker in Philadelphia, his wife is in that. They are in the countryside, and he's talking about all their clothes in the countryside, but suddenly a cousin has died, right? And then she suddenly appears, all dressed up for the funeral in the city, this woman from the countryside, and she didn't recognize her because she's wearing black and she described it with great precision. This not so informal dress that this woman is wearing with great detail, right? And the dress that the husband is wearing. People from the countryside that have culture know how to dress appropriately when the occasion demands. So it's always about, as Hermann said before, about having to dress appropriately for the right occasion. Also in the city, he affects the ornament in the shoes, for example, right? Because the craftsman derives a lot of pleasure from it. Not to deprive the craftsman from making.
Yes.
But also, I think he likes it.
But that has been seized upon, for instance, in the reception of Loos. I'm not, of course, the only person.
No, I mean also the problem that
like Kelly.
in our generation, the Bolshevsky who wrote very influentially about Vienna at the time, and he put it all under kind of Freudian umbrella, And in fact, Vienna was much more divided. Karl Kraus was almost the enemy of Freud. I mean, he thought that Freud is monopolizing the only thing that we have as the most extraordinary treasure is our dreams. And so he thought that psychoanalysis is the kind of illness that proposes its own treatment, And so Vienna seems, from a certain distance, it seems like they all were going to the same cafe and so on. But on the contrary, they were highly divided. And
Different cafes?
different cafes, right? So the division.
Hitler talks very specifically about Hitler writes very beautifully.
Also, yes.
Hitler, another Viennese, talks about how different cafes were populated by different groups.
Also, the English literary scholar Tim has written about it. He even made a graphic kind of circle where they overlap and where they are divided. So in fact, what emerged is much more complex picture. And if you read Jonathan Franzen essays translated from Karl Kraus, you will see that in his immense range of footnotes gives you a taste of the complexity of it. And indeed, I hope that his contribution will add to the, re-examination of the Loos heritage. So with these words, I want to thank the panelists so much for making this contribution, and all of you for listening to us so patiently. And now you are invited to some wine.